r/AskReddit. Serious Redditors, who are the final people to see a missing person? Have they been found? And how has their disappearance affected you? I'm positive me and my little brother were the last ones to see my father alive. We were waiting for the school bus and saw him driving back home with a strange look on his face. We waved to him, but he didn't wave back. After that he went missing. A couple of weeks later, he was found dead hanging from a tree. It was a suicide. It is a scene in my head that gets replayed in my head often, and it hurts me to imagine whatever might have been going through his head. I miss him so much. Edit. Thank you all for all the love and support. You may not think that your comments mean much, but they mean the world to me, knowing that I have all of your support. Thank you all so much. I was the last person to see a patient of mine before his brother locked him in his basement for a few weeks. The patient was eventually found. I felt really privileged to have helped. By chance, he gave me his brother's address as a forwarding address, and the police went looking for him there. When found, my guy was dehydrated and had a broken jaw, but ultimately did well. His brother is currently on a secure psychiatric ward. A friend in college had left a party we were at because he had remembered he left his jacket in another person's dorm. Nobody heard from him the following day. Most figured he was drunk and just passed out somewhere. I even left a voicemail on his phone, like, "Where are you? Lol, hope you aren't dead." Days turned into weeks. There were campus-wide manhunts with hundreds of volunteers. His body finally turned up in an electrical closet 6 weeks later. Accidental electrocution. I worked in a very small public library years ago. There was a young man, maybe 8 to 10 years older than me, that came in every few days for several months. He was very intelligent and extremely interesting. We talked often. One day he came in. We talked for a while and he asked me to make sure he had returned everything he had checked out. I did, and before he left he thanked me for always helping him and being nice, etc. He walked up the street to his apartment and shot himself. I always wished that I had realized he was saying goodbye. I had somewhat of a similar experience. My best friend suffered with suicidal ideation for the entirety of the several years that I knew her. She had attempted a few times unsuccessfully, and I hated the fact that it could been successful and I wouldn't have had closure. So one day, while we were talking about her suicidal thoughts, I asked her to promise me that if she was ever going to attempt again and was not willing to accept help or get talked out of it, that she would say goodbye in a way that I wouldn't realize was goodbye at the time, but gave me some sort of closure. Fast forward a few months, and she was insistent on talking to me on the phone one night. We never really spoke on the phone, so I found this odd, but thought maybe she felt lonely or something, so we talked for about an hour. She promised she was safe, and we exchanged "I love you"s and "good night" s. But after our call she successfully took her life. I only found out because police called me the next day wanting to talk to me, since I was the last contact anyone had with her. Honestly, I completely regret asking for that goodbye, because it led to a lot of guilt that I missed. Obvious, in hindsight, red flags that night that could have saved her. So I really understand what you mean when you say you wished you had known he was saying goodbye. It's not a good feeling at all. I was the last person to see a patient admitted with major depression after his divorce. Just found out he didn't receive custody of his kids. The senior doctor decided he was low risk because he had no significant mental health history, didn't disclose any specific plans to hurt himself, and appeared very well and optimistic. When asked about his occupation during the interview, he vaguely mentioned he worked for the law. So he had unescorted day leave to pick up some toiletries. I held the door on his way out. Never saw him again. 2 weeks later a stranger found his car on the side of the road, bullet in his head. Turned out he was a police officer and had access to a gun to shoot himself. A majority of suicides are men, but yet they are not taken seriously by mental health doctors. I'm a woman. I got hospitalized without having a plan to do suicide, and it helped me a lot. My boyfriend, after a nervous breakdown where he broke a window with his head, got taken by the emergencies, spent the night strapped down to a bed, didn't get hospitalized the next day. They let him go after 3 shots of tranquilizants. He couldn't walk properly. Women are not taken seriously with physical problems. They say it's all in their head, so they get sent to mental health services. Men are taken very seriously with physical pain because they are supposed to be tough, but not when it comes to mental health also, because they are supposed to be tough. Medical professionals should just take people seriously regardless of gender. Saw him at a club with some friends on a night out. One of my friends was hooking up with him on and off, so they had usual uni drama going on. He left after that to go back home or something. The next morning he was found dead. The last ever video was him getting off a bus, and then there was no other CCTV footage of him after he walked a bit further down the road. They investigated our uni for months and months, but no leads were ever found. His death was never solved. It's really unsettling to this day. I was 8 years old when I went with my parents to drop off my little sister for visitation with her biological father. The next morning, my dad woke me up for school and said she didn't come back that night. My dad went to Denver. We knew the BO dad had family in this area for the weekend to go try to look for them and contacted the Denver PD. My local PD didn't assist in finding her at all. In fact, the DA told my parents that you can't abduct your own child, despite the fact that my parents had full custody. I will never forget the day that we got the call that she was found. I was with my mom and two of my other sister at the grand opening of the Cabela's in my hometown when my mom answered her phone and burst into tears. She was in a small town in Michigan, had been homeschooled by the wife of her BO dad, and was going by her middle name. An officer responded to a missing person report. Ironic, because the oldest son of the wife had run away. Some way, somehow, the officer knew something was wrong and looked into the situation. The whole situation was much more difficult on my sister than me. She was basically 2 years behind in school when she came back, and the principal of our elementary school wanted to put her in first grade rather than third, which is what she should have been in at the time. But they ultimately kept her in third grade with our sister. The two are 10 days apart in age and have been best friends their whole life. She got tutoring and managed to get back on track. She is currently in her senior year and looking forward to college in the fall. This person didn't go missing, but I was the last person to see him alive. My best friend and I were drinking on my porch in college. It was about 3:30 AM, and I told him I was going to bed because I had to work the next day. He begged me to have another drink with him, but I insisted that I needed to get to sleep. The next morning I woke up to my roommate screaming for me to come downstairs. I ran down, and my friend had hung himself while sitting down under the porch railing. We cut him down, did CPR even though we knew he was gone already. It was the most traumatic things I've witnessed and had really affected my life. I pieced together things from the night, like the rope he hung himself with was his friend's dog leash that we searched for a long time for and could not find. We think he hid the leash as a premeditated event. Just thinking that he begged to spend just a little more time with me, but I refused really hurts. Edit. Thanks for the gold. Since this is getting a lot of attention, I want to say that if you notice any odd behavior from friends or jokes about someone harming themselves, please take it seriously. Oftentimes it is a cry for help. I'm saddened to hear of so many of you who have had to deal with the same thing. I would hug you all if I could. Please reach out to me if you need to chat. Love. My father had esophageal cancer and had been fighting it for about 3 years. During that time I ran the family business, so we would have income and so that he could keep his insurance and get treatment. I was maybe 16 at the time. Well, one night I'm doing the dishes and me and my parents get into a fight. Something inside me snapped that had been holding together for the last 3 years. I suddenly knew what I had to do. Kill myself. It would solve everything. It was like autopilot. My body moved. I didn't have to think about it. It was natural, like destiny. I told them I wanted to die and ran for the gun safe, which was upstairs far away. My father, who had been very strong before and fairly heavy, tried to block me. I pushed past him, knocking him to the floor. I barely felt it when I hit him. I didn't know how weak he had become, as somehow in my mind I still saw him as strong and indestructible until that moment. In that moment my dad went from being the superhero that is dad to being human. Anyways, I didn't stop to help him up. Instead, I ran crying upstairs trying to open the gun safe. I couldn't read the dial through my own tears, and suddenly all of the energy I had getting there drained, and my body felt extremely heavy, and I fell to my knees. My father had pulled himself up and made his way up the stairs. He grabbed me, pulling me away from the safe, and told my little brother to call the police. A couple months later, my father lost the ability to swallow at all, and quickly his health went. I always felt responsible, thinking if I hadn't knocked him down he would be alright right now. 4 years after he passed, I relived that moment in my head. How he fell, and how I didn't even help him. How selfish I was, and how I hurt him, my brother, and my family. At points it would wash over me like a dream, and I'd come out of it crying, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." I've stopped reliving it. I still wish I could take it back, but I've come to terms with it. Regret is hard though, and I feel for you. I was one of the last people to see a kid who lived across the street before she was kidnapped. Our neighbors across the street were raising their grandchild because their kid's parent was on drugs. The kid was about 6 to 8 years younger than me, and I used to babysit her sometimes, and she would come over and play with me and my siblings. When I was around 14 and she was around 8, several men broke into the house and kidnapped her. I had babysat her the night before, and I can't remember if she was home alone or if one of the grandparents was there. The police found her about 10 to 12 days later. Her mother owed a lot of money for drugs, and so some of the drug dealers tracked down her kid and kidnapped her to try to get the mother to pay them. I never learned the details of what happened while she was kidnapped, and she has gotten therapy and is now married with kids. Edit. She's doing very well and has a happy life. Sorry everyone, I didn't phrase things well. I was one of the last people to see a kid who lived across the street before she was kidnapped. Our neighbors across the street were raising their grandchild because their kid's parent was on drugs. The kid was about 6 to 8 years younger than me, and I used to babysit her sometimes, and she would come over and play with me and my siblings. When I was around 14 and she was around 8, several men broke into the house and kidnapped her. I had babysat her the night before, and I can't remember if she was home alone or if one of the grandparents was there. The police found her about 10 to 12 days later. Her mother owed a lot of money for drugs, and so some of the drug dealers tracked down her kid and kidnapped her to try to get the mother to pay them. I never learned the details of what happened while she was kidnapped, and she has gotten therapy and is now married with kids. Edit. She's doing very well and has a happy life. Sorry everyone, I didn't phrase things well. A very close family friend that was dealing with the loss of his oldest son, who had committed suicide a few weeks earlier. It was hard on all of us, as they both worked with us on our farm, and I had known the son and the father since I was 3 to 4 years old. He came over for dinner on a Sunday night. He was supposed to come back over Monday morning to help out with farm work. It would be his first day back working since the loss of his son. 4 days go by and he never showed up. We figured it was because he was dealing with his personal drama and didn't read much into it, although we did reach out several times and went by his house on the second day since we'd seen him. That Friday we were informed by his ex-wife, who was contacted by authorities, that he had killed himself in his truck several miles outside of town in the middle of a field. He had left our home Sunday night and ended his life just an hour or so later. I sometimes feel like our family did not do enough to console him, and that maybe we didn't realize just how much he was struggling in life. It weighs on me occasionally, especially around the time where both of the tragedies occurred. It was a great loss to me, and I have never properly dealt with the emotions. Edit. Thank you so much for the support. I appreciate everyone responding so kindly. It means the world to have support in a situation I usually fight alone. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Edit again. I'm sorry for annoyingly responding to each comment, but I genuinely thank you all so much. I joined Reddit for fun. I never thought I could receive such support and encouragement from strangers. I thank you all so much for this. You could look at it this way too. He was battling with what happened with his son for weeks. It was probably the most painful and intensely emotional time of his life. It's likely he had decided he was going to end it days before he had dinner with you all. He chose to spend his last moments on earth with you guys. Probably because he loved your family and felt at peace there. You guys were the calm in the storm. Try not to beat yourself up over it. Edit. My first gold. Thank you so much.